Hi guys, today I want to share an article with you that was published in the Rocky Mountain News in 1955 about my family. They were doing a series on displaced persons and they interviewed my family. These are screenshots of a photocopy of the original article my mother clipped from the newspaper. As you can see, even by the time I made the photocopy, the original article had begun to deteriorate and it no longer exists, but the photocopy and my PDF of it remain. In the photo from left to right are my younger brother, my mother holding me, my older brother, my father, and my sister. Every time this photo surfaces, my sister comments about how much she hates it. She wasn't having a good day. The article starts out by talking about the work my father was doing at the time, which was making dynamite with DuPont in Louviers, Colorado, which is south of Denver. The town was originally called Toluca, but was renamed for a town in France where one of the DuPonts came from. DuPont built the plant in Louviers in 1906, and they ceased operations in 1971. The inspiration behind the title of the article, "It's Much Safer Making Dynamite," is that my father was a prisoner of war in a Soviet camp in World War II. But before discussing that in detail, the article says that my family was happy and settled. In the interviews my sister did with my mother said that it took them at least 2 years to feel comfortable and that they felt they made the right decision moving to the United States. They arrived in 1952, and this article was in 1955, so it echoes what my mother said about feeling settled. In the article, my mother states that she wanted an American name for me. My brothers and sister all have decidedly Germanic names, but my mother decided that I should have an American name, so I became Lori. The article states that language was a big barrier for them. It was easier for my mother because as a teenager she worked as a nanny and housekeeper for American soldiers, and that helped her perfect her English. My father didn't have that kind of exposure, so it took him longer. As the article states, my father was a barber in Germany, but his German barber's license wasn't transferable in the United States. He said he hoped to do it again, but he never did. His first job in the U.S. was with the railroad, and then the job making dynamite, and then he found a job closer to home at the Gates Rubber Company. Eventually, he became a life insurance salesman, and he did that the majority of his life. But back to my family while they were in Germany. My father was drafted into the German army in 1944 when he was only 16. He was captured by the Russians in Poland in 1945, and was taken to Smolensk, where he stayed as a prisoner of war for 18 months. When he was released, he weighed 84 pounds. I tried to find photos of prisoner of war camps in Smolensk, but couldn't find any. But I was able to find some photos of German prisoners in Smolensk in 1944. Some statistics. By April 1945, there were about 2 million German prisoners of war in Soviet camps. Russian sources stated that 356,000 out of the 2,388,000 POWs died in Soviet captivity. But Soviet-era sources for those numbers are disputed by historians in the West, who estimate 3 million German POWs were taken by the USSR and up to 1 million died while in Soviet captivity. One source I read said that many German units sought to surrender to the Americans instead of other Allied forces, and in particular to the Red Army because of the conditions. The conditions were cold, cramped, and unsanitary. Infectious diseases were common. The mortality rate was about 15%, and while that's really atrocious, it barely compares to the mortality rate in fascist prisoner of war camps, which was about 60%. Don't forget that there was terrible famine in the country. Soviet citizens were perishing, and provisions for captive Germans was low priority. When he was released in 1945, my father was shipped to a town near Breslau, Poland. From there, they were told to walk to wherever they needed to go. He said he walked for weeks. Here is the map of the distance from Breslau to Augsburg, where he ended up, and found that his family's house had been bombed out. He was able to find his parents, however. That was in Augsburg, and that's where he met and then married my mother. The article then discusses what my mother experienced at the end of the war in East Prussia. I didn't include that here. I did a video about that, and the link is in the description if you haven't watched that yet. Between the near misses my mother faced and my father leaving a prisoner of war camp barely alive, it's truly a miracle that my siblings and I even exist. The article continues about my parents stating that they hoped to be buying a home soon, and they did. They bought one when I believe I was about 5 years old. The article concludes with the information that my maternal grandparents would be arriving in the U.S. soon. My paternal grandparents never came to the U.S., but I met them when we lived in Germany for a short time. And my father ends by saying that they were living 2 to 3 times better than they could in Europe, and they were happy with their decision to immigrate. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to ask questions in the comments and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks. Have a good night.